And then there was another group that actually disturbed me even more, that if you looked them in the eye and you said, so what are you excited about? They had no clue. They had no clue, and it troubled them that they had no clue because they thought everybody else had figured it out, and they were this kind of odd person that didn't know what they wanted to do and were searching for it, right? Finding some direction. And the truth is that only 20% of students who come on our campus can answer that question, what they're passionate about, which means 70% have to find it.
Hi, my name is Trevor Carlson, and I am the host of The Formula. We break down and explore the elements of health, wealth, and happiness in guests from all over the world. And today, I have an awesome guest with me.
My name is David Gould. I don't know how far from all over the world I am. I'm here in Iowa City, Iowa at the University of Iowa. I'm an educator, a faculty member, and I'm an administrator in the Bell and Blank Center for Gifted Education and Talent Development. And what I'm going to talk about is my work with 20-somethings, the questions that they ask themselves to try and launch a life forward, which, by the way, are the same questions we all ask ourselves.
This episode of the Formula Podcast is brought to you by Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is a daily green supplement that comes in the mail. It's a subscription-based product where one scoop is your daily Athletic Greens. Now, if you know me, I've been drinking green shakes almost every day for the last couple years, and recently just got started on Athletic Greens. And it's pretty awesome because all you do is you take the scoop and you put it in your blender bottle or your shaker, and you have your daily advised greens right in one bottle of water. So I highly recommend checking out Athletic Greens. If you check out the show notes or head over to our website, The Formula Podcast, you can check out our sponsored products there. Now, our second product for the day that this episode is brought to you by is a product called Lady Boss. And Lady Boss is a women's supplement company that they have all kinds of products, right? And now I'm sure you're probably thinking, Trevor, you've never taken Lady Boss. It's a women's supplement company. You're right, I haven't, but I know a few people who have. I'm working on getting them on the show to share their experience taking this product, so they can give you their opinion and their experience taking Lady Boss. Now, if you'd like to check out Lady Boss or look at any of their products that they have, you can check out our show notes or head over to theformulapodcast.com and check out our sponsored products there. Now, back to the show. David, thanks again for taking the time to sit down and do this interview with me. Now, we were just having dinner a few minutes ago, and you're kind of sharing some of your own personal story with me. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that? Because you started out with where you went to college and kind of the expectations that you had set. Can you kind of recap that?
Well, I think how I framed it was, I guess it's probably been about 4 years ago now. I was asked to do the commencement address here at the university, and I have a real belief. I never like to look backwards. If you do, you're all of a sudden not looking forwards anymore. But I gave myself an allowance to take a handful of weeks to really think about myself when I entered college, my 4 years, going through it, actually 5 years, going through it, and what it was like when I was sitting in the same chairs of the people that I was going to speak to. And what was interesting to me, fascinating to me, that I hadn't really put together is, I obviously knew my own journey. I knew that the guy that walked across the commencement stage at 21 years old, could never have imagined where I'd be sitting at 51, 52, 53 years old. But what was fascinating to me is to recognize that the same things that I cared about when I was at that age are the same things I care about now. That, how they manifested themselves, the doors that opened and the doors that closed, that kind of ended up taking me on this journey I could never have imagined. But because my decisions were made largely following my heart, not that my head was checked out, but largely following my heart, I arrived at a place that felt very similar. And that was a real eye-opening to me. You know, I think if you look at my academic professional life, it can be defined by a single sentence. It has been the pursuit of how to make higher education more meaningful and community engaged. And I've really looked at how to push this model into a way that the young people that that I come in contact with can have a good launch. I use this analogy. If you think of this magical development window called the 20-something years, right? There's 20-something. Think of it like, we're hopping on an airplane heading out of LaGuardia, and we think we want to go to Seattle, all right? We get in the plane, we start moving, and all of a sudden we go, wait. No, man, I'm totally wrong. I don't want to go to Seattle. I meant San Diego. Well, when you're up in the plane just coming out of LaGuardia, what does that really mean, man? It means this. Now we're going to San Diego. I mean, it's so much easier, so much more convenient. That's why when you're in your 20-somethings, man, you can be an English major today and a history major tomorrow, and all of a sudden I'm confused and don't know what I want to do, and then I end up, I'm in German major. I mean, all those things, right? Because you're discovering, you're hearing things, you're thinking it through. But when you're circling Seattle, and you say, man, I'm in the wrong spot, I don't want to be here. I'm not saying it's impossible, to get yourself to San Francisco or wherever you want to go. It's a heck of a lot harder. And that's what makes this period so important. If you can think it through, if you can kind of map a journey, if you can kind of put yourself on a good trajectory, have had some time to think who you are and what you care about and what you want to do with your life, and have made some of those decisions, what you're willing to fight for, what you're willing to persevere, then if you got a good answer to that, then, man, the path gets a lot easier for you.
So how did you come up with this? So I'll just call it a formula. How did you come up with this, personally, how did you come up with this journey or the fact that, what we talked about earlier was kind of creating or designing your own life. And that's kind of what you're talking about a little bit now, is trying out enough things.
I mean, I'll give you both an academic or an extrinsic answer, and I'll give you an intrinsic answer. The extrinsic answer is that I was the assistant director, one of the assistant directors in the College of Arts and Sciences. The dean took me to coffee. It was January 2010, and she said to me, the university is dropping to the bottom of the Big Ten. We weren't last, but we were towards the bottom in retention. And the interesting thing, it wasn't just students after their freshman year, but after their sophomore, even their junior year, we're just choosing not to come back. Didn't really know why. We didn't really have a direct reason for why that was happening. Probably, you could make some hypotheses. It was coming out of the 2008 recession. We get a lot of kids from the northwest suburbs. Maybe, they decided with tough economic times, maybe mom and dad's jobs are a little bit more fragile than they used to be. Maybe they were saying, we'll go stop paying out-of-state tuition and go home. I mean, you could make some theories, right? But what was also really interesting is it wasn't our worst students, the way they weren't failing out. There were certainly a couple of those, and then there was a bulk that was kind of doing just fine and viable students, and then there were some of our best and brightest. And to her credit, I mean, again, there's probably an extrinsic reason why the provost and everybody was all alarmed about this. You can have the biggest freshman class in the history of man, but if you are, losing them along the way, still have to have upper level classes, and now they're undersubscribed, you're leaving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on the table. So there's an extrinsic reason. But to her credit, she was really troubled about how a young person can be in our midst for 2 or 3 years and so easily pull up roots. I knew a lot of answers to that question. I mean, cost of tuition, cost of education, things that keep me up at night but I don't really have an answer to. But I believe that one placed to mind, anecdotally, these were students that I was seeing in my office day in and day out, were young people that I would call being hothoused. These were young adults that were coming onto our campus that, one cohort knew what they loved. I love art and history and music and anthropology and sociology. But whether it was their own voice, their parents' voice, society's voice, they'd been talked out of the fact that that was a practical way to map a life. You know, time to grow up, time to be a business major, a computer science major, a pre-med major, something that's gonna, you know, cost a lot to go to school. So it's time to grow up and do something that is gonna get you somewhere, right? And then there was another group that actually disturbed me even more, that if you looked them in the eye and you said, so what are you excited about? They had no clue. They had no clue, and it troubled them that they had no clue because they thought everybody else had figured it out, and they were this kind of odd person that didn't know what they wanted to do and were searching for it, right? Finding some direction. And the truth is that only 20% of students who come on our campus can answer that question, what they're passionate about, which means 70% have to find it and have to use this wonderful opportunity to search and explore and figure out what they want to do in life. And so I decided and proposed to her to teach a class, I called it Life Design, based on the idea that there was a better way to use the university. To think of it like a laboratory, a place where you can discover who you are and what you care about, what you want to contribute to the world, what you're willing to fight for, what matters. Now, extrinsically, I could make you an argument that, my gosh, you're going to need to be remarkable in this world at whatever you do. And if you love it, you're going to spend more time on it. You're going to put the extra effort in. I mean, if it's just something I'm just getting by, this is good enough, I'll get my grade. I'm not enjoying this. Let me go do something. Class is done. Let's go someplace downtown or something and have some fun. But if I'm loving it, I'm going to keep working it, man, because I take pride in it. I care about it. And if I spend the time, I'll become remarkable. And the world's going to require you, no matter what you pick, to be remarkable. It is. Degree's not enough. And of course, the intrinsic argument is doing what you love, doing what you care about. My theory was that if I was wrong, and let's just say that person whose love was someplace else and bought into the idea that I need to be practical, walked across that commencement stage, and I was wrong. Boy, they walked on the other side and there was their job and everything's great. And then let's say I'm doubly wrong. And they go to work in their little cubicle, and there's people there in any job who this is what I love, right? So while people are buzzing around, passionate about this, I'm just kind of marking time, man, trying to squeeze into my evenings and weekends, my 2 weeks vacation, what life really matters to me, right? Yeah. And nobody cares. Yeah. I stay off the radar. I spent 30 to 40 years like that and nobody cares. So I'm doubly wrong, right? Man, it worked. I guess my argument would be, what a horrible, unfortunate way to spend your life without even trying to chase what you care about. Yeah. I don't believe in a fairy tale, right? Not everybody lives happily ever after. You don't always get, the thing you were chasing, right? But from my experience, it's always about the journey. And those people who hang on to their dreams and don't ever let them go, even if it means working a side job, even if it means doing other things to support it, even if it means, small house for a big life, don't regret it. Yeah. And so that's what Life Design was about. And it was based on an intrinsic notion that, there was no attendance, there was no midterms, there was no traditional carrots and sticks to put you in those seats. And so the experiment was, would you come? And I'll be honest, my colleagues told me it was destined for failure. They believed that learning for learning's sake was third or fourth on a student's priority list.
This doesn't feel just like learning, though. It feels like self-discovery.
I would agree, but there you got to keep in mind there was nothing like this, right? Yeah. There was nothing like this. Most classes, it's not too far gone from when you were in college. Think about it, man. Yeah. why do you sit in that chair? Well, first thing is, it's a hoop you're jumping through on the other side because I need these credits to graduate.
Yeah.
So the number one reason I'm here, and I'm making a big generalization. There's obviously classes that people love and that people sit through. I'm just talking big generalization here. But for many students, I'm here because this is on my checklist and I got to get through the hoop and I need a degree and I need to get to the other side. And then what am I doing, man? I'm taking as many notes trying to listen to you, not because I'm writing things down because I'm interested and because that's fascinating what you said, but I'm writing them down because this is the stuff I'm going to have to spit back to you on your midterm or your final. And I'm going to memorize all this stuff, and we play this game that if I spit it back to you properly, you'll give me a good enough grade, and I move forward.
Yeah.
And so this was a whole different picture. And quite honestly, I'll be honest, it sounded like a really good idea in the spring. But as I'm getting closer and closer to fall, I'm sitting there thinking, man, what if they don't come? And I'll add one more wrinkle to it. I'm not so vain that if I started with 100 students and I tried a big experiment, and by the end of it, was an 8-week class. I deliberately made it an 8-week class to test drive it, right? At the end of the 8 weeks, there were 6 or 7 people who kept showing up and the rest had left, and they showed up because they felt sorry for me. My pride is not so big that I can't get over that. I'd say, boy, bad idea, never do it again. But as I also shared with you over dinner, Tony Hsieh, in a very serendipitous thing, he's the CEO of Zappos, he showed up. He had just come out with his book, Delivering Happiness. I was doing this thing in the summer where we were reading these books that I thought would resonate with my students, the Seth Godins, the Daniel Pinks, all these kind of, Adam Grant, all these kind of wonderful writers that had messages that I wanted to incorporate. And over the summer, I had a reading group of my former students that were reading these things with me, and then I would reach out to the author and say, could we do an interview with you? And we'd record it, and then the idea was that now you're taking my class in the fall and you read these chapters, you read this book, whatever it might be, and then you're able to listen to a podcast where somebody just your age unpacks it, say, okay, I've read it too, now what it really resonates with me where I'm sitting right now. And so I was recording these things and putting them in place. And Tony had written Delivering Happiness. I wrote to him for an interview. He said, sure. And then as it got closer, he said, Dave, I'm on my book tour. My tour bus is literally driving right past Iowa City on 80, I think. I'm going from Omaha to Chicago. Why don't we do it like this? And I looked at my calendar and I was like, man, that's first day of my class. Why don't we just do it in front of my students?
That's awesome.
And I'll end with this and we'll move on, but it was an unbelievable moment for me because I really didn't know. It's one of those kind of like those moments where you just close your eyes and take a deep breath and keep walking forward. I didn't know, number one, if the students would even be showing up, right? They hadn't bought into anything yet. And even more importantly, if they did, would they even care? Now, Zappos wasn't a household word. Tony Hsieh wasn't a household word at the time. And, we showed up. Not only did they also show up, not only did they also care, but Tony, in this kind of very soft-spoken, almost matter-of-fact kind of way, at the end of class said, hey, I'm sticking around town for a little while. Does anyone want to show me some stuff to do? I think that's kind of what he said. I didn't even know if I understood it. And I swear to you, 100 people packed their backpacks and followed him out of the room. And I remember it was over at EPB at the English Philosophy Building. And I remember watching, it was like a beehive following him. And I remember I was kind of standing outside, realizing I had no control over this and just kind of watching this happen. And I watched them. They went to, his bus was parked in the gravel lot across from the Sheridan, his big tour bus. And he stood there for 2 hours as they asked him questions, as they took their pictures with him, as they pulled their books out and showed them things that they'd read that resonated with them. And what I realized is that what my colleagues had misinterpreted for, lack of interest and all of that was dead wrong, man. They weren't, what they wanted, whether they knew it or not, is they wanted to be inspired. And I realized if you could do that, then education could be totally different.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff, man.
I
'Cause
know.
I'm thinking through, one of the initial thoughts that I had was just, like, you know, I don't know how many people you've met in their mid to late 20s or 30s where they jumped through the hoops. They checked all the boxes, you know. They did everything they were supposed to do and got the job, or maybe didn't get the job that they thought they would get after their degree. And they come home every day, and you can hear it in their voice when you talk to them or when you see them out, and they're just not fulfilled. Like they're almost upset about it too. Like, I don't know if they're upset, like, oh, I checked all these boxes and I didn't get what I want, but it's just like, is this what I did all that for? Or is this life?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, you said mid-20s, 30s. Interesting thing is my life, I have an online life design class right now, which I did deliberately. Wasn't sure it was going to work right. I wanted to try it, but I also wanted to be able to expand my reach. I have students from Canada and New Mexico and Texas. I mean, all kinds of people that would never be able to take a class here. But here's the interesting fact. Half of my students are 40, 45. I mean, the questions that we're talking about, you know, who am I? What do I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? Never really go away. You're continually evaluating the landscape and thinking about where you are and how you're evolving and changing too. So, so this is an ongoing thing. The 20s is an opportunity to kind of get yourself on a good start. Yeah. Because what happens is that, and this troubles me and why I have continued to develop and try and, it's not enough to find what you're passionate about. I've come to the conclusion you need to figure out how to plug it into the world too, and need to figure out both of those while you're here. But, the interesting thing is that those students who are unable to do that, it's a 50-50 coin toss. This is a statistic for you. You graduate from college, it's a 50-50 coin toss that not only do you get a job in your major, but you get a job that even required a college degree when you graduate. And so, we've got these people that I studied that history you told me to do, right? I followed my dream, and now I am sitting selling real estate, which, by the way, is a noble, good job, but it's not where my heart was, right? It's not where I was headed. And heaven forbid you don't want to live with mom and dad forever, and heaven forbid you fall in love and now have a couple kids and a car payment and a condo or, all that type of stuff. And the next thing you know, you take a look back and, it's not that you regret going to college. You remember this place is a nice place to be, but that person who you were in your 20s is now somebody young and naive, man. That's who I was. I was some young and naive guy. And quite honestly, what happens? Everything around you confirms that. Time to grow up, get over that, quit being a dreamer. This is the nuts and bolts of the world. You get up, you slug your way to work, you let a boss yell and scream at you as you sit in your cubicle, you take the lunch when you're told, you come home, you try and get your kids through homework, try to mow the lawn, try to do all of this. And then you sit with your wife on the sofa and you flip on The Bachelor till you fall asleep to do it all again. And that becomes the treadmill. And the idea of these dreams, if you will, get lost. And this is, you can take it for what it's worth, but I believe then that kind of hole, that fulfillment would have felt and would have filled, ends up getting filled with, well, all right, man, I'm going to really do it all on my 2-week vacation. Or I got an opportunity to get myself a really cool car, or, more square footage, and look at the house we now can afford. And that begins to become the consolation prize for living a rich, deep life.
So to me, as someone that's listening to that, and I just turned 30 in January, and that scares the shit out of me to hear that, I remember I read, so when I read books, I take tons of notes in the back, and I'll go back and review them every once in a while, or I'll type up my notes and publish them as a blog post. Mm-hmm. I went back and read one the other day, and it said something along the lines of, I had this point highlighted, and it said, how you spend your time now equals how how you spend your time in the future. So it's like, if you do the math right now, you know, what are you doing right now that will get you to like the future you want? So I'm thinking about like, oh man, I watched a little extra Netflix and I should have maybe this week. So I'm like, I think about that a lot actually, is, you know, what goals do I have in like 3 or 5 or 10 years? And then how do you spend your time now in order to get there? Just a random tangent I was thinking about.
No, I agree with that totally. I mean, one of the things I think about, I mean, 4 years to me, and it's all semantics, right? But 4 years to me seemed like an eternity when I was a freshman.
Yeah.
It's a little different if you look at it as 2 million minutes. That's what it is, man. It's 2 million minutes. And it's 2 million minutes to get so many things right. Now, that doesn't mean I don't take the time to enjoy a Netflix show and go to dinner and have some laughs with my friends, right? But in 4 years, man, I can use this opportunity to put myself and prepare myself in place for a great launch.
Yeah.
Or I can just waste them and show up on the other side and hope something great happens.
Yeah.
In fact, you're 30, even if you miss those last 2 million minutes, well, there's a whole bunch in front of you, right?
Yeah.
And it's never, as long as you're breathing, man, it's never too late. And so, you know, how do you get a handle on the things that you really care about? And how do you begin to design a path, which is where the whole life design notion comes from? How do you design a path to get there?
Yeah.
You know?
That was my next question. You just took it right out of my mouth. So a lot of the questions asked on this show are like how, why, what would you do? So I imagine, all right, I'm just going to put a scenario in front of you and you just tell me how you would walk this person through that. It's a freshman. You ask them the question like, you know, what was it? What are you passionate about? What are you excited about? Is that what the question was?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you ask them and they're just like, I don't know. What process do you walk them through? Or what do you do with that person to help them go from there to figuring out what those are and then kind of helping them to line their passions and what they're excited about with their career and their future?
Well, I'll give you a quick answer. How do you know that, man, you love chocolate cake and you hate broccoli?
You try it.
Exactly, man. So the question is, if you sit in your apartment or your dorm room and you expect this perfect job to come from on high and strike lightning in your carpet and set your hair on fire and tell you what you need to, where you need to go, it's highly unlikely.
Yeah.
You know, how do you find the person you want to spend your life with? Well, you go on a bunch of blind dates. You go out with a lot of people, right? And some of them are going to be nightmares, and some of them are going to be, it was okay, I'm not in a real hurry to do it again, and some of them are going to be really great, like I'd like to learn more. And you take that to a point until you find someone that you can't live without. Or it's a point where you say, you know what, there's an advantage to me now to dive deeper into this than it is for me to continue to keep exploring. Yeah. And it's no different when it comes to your passions, and passions will change. And that's why a constant reflection. So it's one thing to go on that nightmare date or to try that new thing that you thought would be fun that really wasn't any fun. But then you have to sit there and think, why did I think that would be a blast and really be meaningful to me? And why wasn't it? And that way it begins to inform the search, right? So you begin to get closer, you're getting warmer and you're getting warmer and you're getting warmer until you find it. And like I said, and then it might shift on you.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing that I think plays into this as well. And this isn't just my idea, this is research driven. So it's like a ladder to what it means to, at the end of the day, maybe I'll back up a second. At the end of the day, what do you and I really want, right? We want to live a life that makes us happy. We want to live a good life that brings us fulfillment and meaning and joy.
In whatever way that's probably different for everyone.
It is. It is absolutely. But there are some commonalities. You know, if you and I, and it's like a ladder, if you and I are cold, if you and I are hungry, and we have the ability to put a jacket on, to go grab a meal, I mean, those kind of decisions, we'll be happier than if we couldn't, right? Moving up the ladder, if you find something that you get lost in, Csikszentmihalyi calls it flow.
Yeah.
It's where you begin to lose track of time. You just kind of start to dive in, and it absorbs you, man. And it's like being in the zone. I'm just totally focused on this, and time just gets away from me. You're happier still.
Yeah.
But the richest, deepest life, and again, this is research driven. This isn't just Dave Gould's ideas. Is when you take that, Ken Robinson calls it the element. And you turn it towards something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you plug it into the world and you let it glow. That's the deepest way to live. Yeah. And that's ultimately, I believe, what we all should be chasing. You know, what's that thing that, you know, you believe you uniquely have to provide and give to the world, that you're willing to work on, that you're willing to nurture and care about? And then how does that add value to others? And that's where fulfillment, that's where meaning, that's where happiness comes from.
You're kind of talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Self-actualization a little bit?
Yeah, and I'm also talking a lot about, there's a guy named Viktor Frankl. Have you, Man's Search for Meaning?
Yeah, so my friend Anise gave me that book to read probably around Christmas time. Yeah. And I've read it 2 or 3 times since then. I've listened to it on Audible a couple times. Yeah.
Then you know what I'm talking about. It's really, to me, it's a hard book to read. It's Viktor Frankl is describing his experience in the Holocaust. He had his wife and his father and his mother all exterminated by the gas ovens. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible time in our history, and he describes every bit of it. But the lessons that he learned were that kind of at the essence of who each of us are, is really a drive to live a life of meaning. Yeah. That's really what we're all kind of, now you can define that lots of different ways, right? I can define it by the kids I raise. I can define it by the type of friend I am. And maybe it can define it by all the above, right? In different ways and shapes and form. I mean, there's not, it doesn't have to be a linear path, but nevertheless, that was his conclusion of all of that, is that the richest, deepest life he could live. And that's consistent. I mean, that's Martin Seligman. The top of the ladder is the meaningful life. I mean, over and over again, you find that kind of message in our literature by our thought leaders that talk about for you and I to live a life that is going to be satisfying. It's going to have to include others. Yeah. It's going to have to include us making contributions and feeling like there's a reason why we're getting up this morning that matters. Yeah. And so, yes, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is part of it, and he's absolutely right. How happy are we really going to be if I go home, if I'm going to bed tonight hungry, if I'm worried about can I pay my rent at the end of the month, am I sleeping with one eye open because I'm worried someone's going to repossess my car? That doesn't necessarily make for a very happy life, and it also doesn't make for a lot of pondering of big ideas. But the interesting thing is that yes, if I inject money into your life and I take those problems away and now you sleep, like a baby because you're not worried about that, you'll be happier. Mm-hmm. But if I inject 10 times that money into your life, you're not 10 times happier. Right. There comes a saturation point. There comes a point where, okay, it moved me up. I'm now not hungry. I'm now able to begin to focus on what a really fulfilling life could be to live. Yeah.
I think a lot of people get stuck in the I'm trying to think of what the right term is. It's basically just like that, it's trying to think of the right term where it's like, well, once I get this, then I'll do it. The one I hear a lot is like, oh, once I'm able to retire, then I'll travel. Or you talked about this before where it's like, once I get my 2 weeks of vacation, then I'm going to go see every city in Europe during those 2 weeks. And it's like binge traveling, I think some people have called it, where you go to as many places as fast as you can to see it all. Mm-hmm. Then you have to wait till next year to go again. Right. It's just, I don't know. I don't know how to exactly articulate how that, like when I think about it, I'm just like, man, that just seems like a sad way to live, where you're always waiting for this tiny little thing that may or may not be there.
Well, here's a couple of things. Number one, everything that we're surrounding ourselves is telling you that message, right? It's telling you that that power and success is equaled in possessions. It's what you can buy that begins to establish yourself. It's a false doctrine, right? It's a false truth, and it's a hard one to break out of. We also live in a culture and society that views kind of work without end. You know, that you are your job. I mean, you used to define in our country who we were, kind of answering those big eternal questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What life's all about? We define those often in very spiritual terms. But now we define those in very professional terms. Who am I? I'm a banker. I'm a lawyer, right? That's what I do. Gives me my worth. So when you begin to take away that collateral in our society, man, that's a scary thing. I'm now no longer the dean of the College of Education. I'm just a normal guy. I'm now no longer the star that everybody stops by my table and wants selfies with me. I'm now just a normal guy. But the truth is, and recent current events plays it out as we look at these very successful lives, and you realize underbelly how unhappy they are, right? The truth is that again, that's a false doctrine. That's a false truth, and you need to fight against that. That notion of waiting till tomorrow, that I'm going to eventually have enough money that then I will check out, that never happens.
Yeah.
There is no enough, right? When you begin to chase that, it continues to become larger and larger and larger.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking about it with tons of other things too, where, I mean, I do this myself. I'm sure you've probably done this a few times, where you're like, yeah, I'm going to start that goal tomorrow, or I'm going to go do this thing once the things line up, but they never do until you make them, right? And we were talking about some of the travels I'm going to be doing this fall, and I've wanted to do this for so long, and I've had opportunities, but I've always been like, well, I'm going to wait to bring someone with me, or I'm going to wait for this, or I'm going to do that. And then finally I just got to the point where I was like, if I keep doing this, I'm going to wake up in 10 years and maybe I'll have kids then, or I'll have to be somewhere physically. Just like, whatever happens, I just have to go. I mean, whatever comes up, you just kind of have to, once you make a commitment, you just have to kind of work through those things. And making the commitment today that it's going to, whether it's your career or travel or whatever goal you have, and working towards it today versus putting it off, or saying like, after I watch the next episode of The Office or House of Cards or whatever. So it's different once you start down that path to how you feel when you wake up in the morning, for one.
So John Irving, he's a relatively famous American author, wrote According to Garb, Cider House Rules, Hotel New Hampshire. He tells me these little anecdotes, I think, over the years to try to make me a better writer. They've never really done much for my writing, but they, I think, have made me a better person. And one of the little writing anecdotes he told me is that when your character is at a crossroads, one path leading to a predictable outcome. I mean, boy meets girl. I don't know exactly when or how, but I can see it coming from the start, right? They're going to eventually wind up together, have a picket fence, 2.5 kids in a minivan, right? It's all, I see it all going to lay out. The other path leads you into a dark forest. Anything can happen. I mean, I'm not talking about you're going to die, but I mean, you could fail though. Yeah. You could be unsuccessful, but that's where magic resides. Mm-hmm. That's where magic resides. You always take your character, he says, into the forest. Yeah. You always do. That's where life is lived. Mm-hmm. And, so to use your analogy, I mean, you could kind of keep marking time, doing the things you are, or you could take the risk and take the leap into the forest. Yeah. Granted, if you look at it and say, well, hey man, there's not a sure thing in here, right? Well, no, of course there's not. But as long as, I always look at worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario can happen to me?
Yeah.
I can try something in class, all for the right reasons, all to try and make an impact on my students. It fails. I'm open. That's why I call things experiments, because by that very nature, an experiment notes that this might not work. We're taking a try at this. Well, I can live with that. That's called a noble failure, which is, by the way, different than a failure that happens because I didn't plan, I was lazy and all that. I did everything I could, but it didn't work out, right? I can live with that. And in fact, what I would argue is that people that don't have some failure in their portfolio are probably also the same people that are trying nothing new. Yeah. So I mean, if you think of your life as a book, which one would you like to read, man?
Yeah.
Would you like to be, or which one would you like to be even better? Which one would you like to write? Yeah. Because in a sense, that's what you're doing. Do you want to write one that, you mentioned you're taking off, right? Do I want to write one that I just closed that chapter and it's like, holy cow, what's going to happen to him, man? This is great. Where's he? He's heading into Prague, man. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Or do you want one that's like, oh man, okay, I know where this is going, I know which one I want to live, and I know which one I'd like to try and write.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I'm kind of a dork, so sometimes I listen to like the Joe Rogan podcast and a few of these others, and there's this one clip that I've done this exercise whenever things seem like maybe a little dark, like you're in the middle of the forest and you're like, what the hell did I get myself into, or why is this happening? He has this quote, and it's like, imagine like you're the main character in like your movie, and you're where you are right now today. Like, what do you want to happen? Like anything. Like it helps to take it. Like it's not you anymore. You're telling this main character what you want them to do, what life that you want them to live. And I think whenever I do that, then I'm like, oh, clearly this is what I need to do, right? But I think it's a lot harder when you're like in that moment, right? And you have to try to figure out how to get out of it. I think if people had this ability, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if they had this ability to almost take a step back and even treat it like a story, like how many countries would you live in then? How many languages would you learn how to speak? What types of things would you try to do? How would you spend your days? And I think if people could do that, they might be a little less excited about the 2 weeks vacation and more excited to jump out of bed in the morning.
I totally agree. My daughter who leaves for Ecuador to teach for 2 years in August has a giant world map on her wall, and she puts push pins into the places she's visited. She wants to see it all.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. It really is about thinking what kind of life you want to live. And here's the thing. I can guarantee you, as much as I can guarantee, I guess, I can guarantee you that those people I've met that have followed their interests, the things that they cared about, even when they haven't led to the promised land, right? Even when it was a bumpy, crazy journey, a great story to tell, right? Have never regretted following their heart.
Yeah.
People that do are the people that don't, right? That sit home and ask what if.
Yeah. And in my life, and I don't know if this has been the same with you, but when I look back at those any moments where I feel like any type of pain when I look back are the moments where I didn't do anything, or I didn't do what I wanted to do, or where I felt like I was being pulled or pushed to do. So I imagine that there's probably some people in their 40s or 50s that you've had some of these conversations with where they've led a life where, I guess I'll call it maybe a lack of fulfillment or a lack of lining up with their passions or what they're excited about, and they want to make a change. That's a little bit different than like a 18-year-old college freshman that, is at the airport taking off. What do you tell those people that are later on in life and they want to make that adjustment?
Well, it is different and it's not. The notion is that a successful journey, best journeys are designed, right? If you and I want to go to St. Louis, we can hop in our car and just start driving west and hope we hit it, or we can thoughtfully plan out how to go and see how to get there. And then even more, we can also start looking and saying, where might we want to stop? Where's a good restaurant? What can we see along the way, right? Those are three very, very different experiences, both from a success standpoint as well as a fulfillment.
Yeah.
And while, anything that you're able to kind of start earlier gives you more time to try things and make mistakes and do that. But it doesn't mean that at any part in the journey you don't jump in. If I'm in my 40s and my life at this moment isn't happy and fulfilling, I feel like I missed the boat, I feel like I made mistakes, I feel like I used to have a dream and somehow it escaped me.
Yeah.
Well, there's kind of two options, right? One is you can continue to feel like that and do nothing and take that to your dying day, or you can say, that's it, man. How do I rekindle it? How do I get there? Now, that doesn't mean I've got 3 kids and a car payment and a house payment. It doesn't mean I can just walk out and quit my job and all of a sudden do, but I can begin to dig out of Alcatraz. Yeah. I can begin to plan my escape. And there is some deep satisfaction, even if I'm not where I want to be, waking up every morning and trying to get there.
Yeah.
The reality is like I said, I think when we started off, I don't believe everybody lives happily ever after in a fairy tale. We don't all have this magical ending like the Disney movie. But if you chase the things you care about, if you cherish the things you care about, even if this is where I ended up, man, there's things that were out of my control. I found very few people that don't find that spot satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just get this feeling whenever I'm, I think about in the mornings, right? And, in the mornings when you wake up, and I'm sure, I feel like everybody has felt this way, but you wake up and you're like kind of laying there and you're like, do I really got to do this shit again today, And I feel like I use that as kind of like a compass, right? Like, am I just saying that because it's just one of those days? Everybody has rough days every once in a while. Or is it something where it's like my compass from all the things I've tried or the experiments? Is it telling me that I'm not lined up with where I need to be and I need to make some changes? Yeah.
I mean, I mean, obviously, all of us need time to step away. All of us need time to recharge. All of us need time to reflect, right? Vacations are good for us.
Yeah.
But there are very few days that I wake up and I'm not ready with the things I care about to hit the ground running.
Oh, yeah.
There's very few days that I have with that. And I mentioned to you, which dates me a little bit, but I was a young teacher here when 9/11 hit. And I can't describe what that feeling was like for me, and I think a lot of my colleagues, a lot of the people around me, it was a feeling that the sky was falling, that the world was very different, and things that kind of seemed to matter seemed so silly and trivial in light of it. Much like, if heaven forbid, you and I wake up tomorrow morning and we all of a sudden have this horrible news that we've got cancer or we got something, you know what I mean? All of a sudden, the things that we thought at this very moment were important, all of a sudden how quickly that falls away.
Yeah.
And I remember after 9/11, waking up the next morning and being so grateful that what I was working on, while it wasn't going to change the world, wasn't going to change the situation, wasn't going to correct this craziness that seemed to be going on at the moment, I was so thankful that I had that not only to go back to, but that's where my life had been spent. Something in my own little small way I felt was pecking away at making the world a little better, was chasing something that actually mattered as opposed to I got more square footage, I got a newer model car, I got cool looking threads, right?
Yeah, and it's almost like that minimalism or essentialism movement where a lot of people are, even the guys who started the minimalism podcast, they have a documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
Yeah, I have.
What were they talking about? They were doing the same thing, really. And they just woke up one day and they were miserable. Yeah. And then I don't remember how, I should probably go back and watch the documentary because I don't remember what their path into minimalism was. But I know that they were like sick. One of them was like getting a divorce. They had these high paying jobs and they were just kind of done. Mm-hmm. Like they're like, I got all this, I hit all my goals, but now I hit my goals and I actually didn't want any of them.
Yeah, you're climbing the ladder, but you realize it was against the wrong house, And I think the questions you need to ask yourself is, what really matters. People, when you ask them that question, they will say, oh, it's my kids, man, it's my family. That's what really matters to me. And then you watch them and you then ask yourself, man, is that where I'm spending my time?
Yeah.
Yeah. The things that really matter, is that where my investment is? Is that where my treasures are going? Mm-hmm. Is that what I'm nurturing? And often those are inconsistent answers.
Yeah.
If your house was on fire, what would you save? When you ran in it, what would be the things you'd take, man? They'd be they'd be first making sure that my loved ones are out, then they'd be my family photos, and you know what I mean? That's the stuff there's things that matter to me, and the things that I'm connected to have very little to do with wealth in the traditional sense.
Yep, and I live alone, so me grabbing my books first totally makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, you're not letting someone die in there.
No. There's no one else in the house as far as I know. Yeah. So, we were talking, you mentioned something earlier about traveling, and I was thinking about how I like to travel, where you were saying, you were talking about planning if you're older and you're planning out your life design for your remaining years or from wherever you're at. And I was thinking about like how I travel, which is substantially different than almost anyone else I know. I'm like, first plane ticket, and once I'm on the ground there, I figure out where I'm gonna stay. And then after that, then I'm like, all right, let's go find this stuff to do now. Because I like to have this like air of serendipity. Mm-hmm. That's how I don't know, but I don't know if your traveling experience has been like that, where sometimes it's just nice just to take a walk and to let to not have everything planned. Like you're there, you have a roof over your head, and now it's like, what direction do you want to go? Well, you can go any.
Yeah, you'll leave the door open for magic, of course.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you this too. You were talking about, the path for other people moving forward or their plan. What's your plan from here? Because you've done so much stuff. You've worked on documentaries, movies, your classes. I'm probably not even covering half of it. But
that's a really, really good question, and one you'll probably have to check back in a while. It's important for me to continue to be growing, right? I like to build things, and once they're built, I like to learn from them and see, okay, so what can I take from that, and how will that inform the next construction? I also think that it's important, and again, everyone's different. I mean, some people find a niche and they'll spend their entire life studying that, right? And there's a value in that, especially if it's meaningful, but they'll spend their whole life. I'm kind of like the plant that starts growing and then all of a sudden says, you know what, I need a bigger pot. And it's not because I need a bigger pot, right? It's not that I've gotten, it's just that I need to keep growing. I need to keep expanding. I need to keep reaching. The one thing I don't want to be doing, I don't even teach the same class the same way twice in a row.
Yeah. You probably get bored.
Yeah, I don't want. I can tell you one thing for sure is if we're sitting here from a year from now, I don't want to be telling the same stories.
Yeah.
That's one thing I do know for sure. So, so it's a good question. I'm looking for a bigger pot would be my answer.
Yeah, and I mean you have another session of the Green Room coming up.
Yeah,
right?
that I am committed to. I'm going to teach that the first 8 weeks. I'm rethinking. I mean, the big experiment on that was, I had a small class, honor students, that basically I brought thought leaders from all over the country, and each of them brought a question that they believe 20-somethings should struggle with and higher education should help inform. And that's what they brought with them, and that was the premise of every evening's conversation, and these were, again, thought leaders from all over the country. It was a beautiful, magical experience. We ate dinner together. We took the class on the road. They wanted to enlarge it. They said, Dave, this is perfect, wonderful, but 30 students isn't enough. We need this thing to be more like 100 students. And I knew that intimacy, that magic wouldn't translate. Can't take 30 students and make it 100 students and make it feel like 30. So I said, all right, well, that's where it's going to go. So, all right, so what would be the next thing? And if it's going to be big, then what if we took the class and put it in the largest auditorium, largest theater I can find, and invite the entire city then to join us? And so last fall, we moved it to the Engler Theater and, averaged over 600 people a night and engaged. And my line was inviting the city to school. Our classroom became theirs. And I'm going to do it again, but again, as I just mentioned, I don't like to do things twice. So how do we begin to deepen that experience? How do we begin to allow the community to build to it? Yeah. And when the guest is gone, when the class is over, have enough aftershocks that it makes a difference. And I'm continuing to tweak with the design. How can I also make it more engaging to my students who are part of it? We had a great success in people coming. We had wonderful people that shared their stories and communicated. I think my students enjoyed it. But it's getting like a ladder, man. Will they come? Will they care? Will they continue to think about it 3 days afterwards, and then will they be spurred to action? Yeah. Will they begin to now implement in their lives and begin to say, you know what, that'd be maybe an interesting thing to try to do. And now I'm contributing in a way I wasn't before to making our community a little better.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a really big question. So you've met people from all walks of life. You were talking about your time spent with Ashton Kutcher, your time spent with the Dalai Lama, and I'm sure there's hundreds of other, Dan Gable, hundreds of other people, I'm sure. If you think about the biggest lessons that you've learned from these extraordinary people, what are the first couple that come to mind? Well,
at their root, they're not any different than you and me. They make mistakes. They, are test driving things. But what they have is they cling to a vision and to a picture, an idea, a dream, with a grip that you and I and others sometimes don't. One of my buddies is Nate Staniforth, who's arguably one of the top, if not the top, young magicians in the country. He's the equivalent of a David Blaine and that kind of type. Got a brand new book out, tours all around the world. And, he will half jokingly say, reason why I'm standing here and others aren't is because I was so stubborn, so set, so determined that I was not going to give up. You mentioned Ashton. Ask Ashton. Ashton went to New York on a modeling gig, and he calls his buddies back and says, I'm going to come back here. This is where my life is going to be led. And they thought it was the most hysterical thing in the world. Yeah, I mean, we'll all be models too, right? This is kind of a funny thing. And when he went there, he said, there is no way I am ever going to go home a failure. I will do whatever I have to do. Walt Disney, got fired from his Kansas City Star newspaper because they thought he wasn't creative. He had to give up his kind of film studio he was doing. He resorted to eating dog food because he had no money. He took his last pennies and hopped on a train and went to California, and the rest was history. It's I hate to say it, but there is this notion that this is why I'm here, and I won't stop. Because trust me, there's enough challenges that you'll face that if you don't have that attitude, if you don't have that belief, you will. Yeah. And that's why, and that's my argument too, because if I'm throwing a dart at a moving job target, I'm trying to predict what the next big career is going to be, not from here, but from here, and it doesn't happen right away. I get faced with challenges. What's your instinct? Your instinct is, man, I hit. There must be something wrong with my dart throwing. I hit the wrong target. Let's go throw again. But if you're doing something that you'd be like, man, it would break my heart to stop. Yeah. This is why I'm here. This is why I get up every morning. I can't quit. I'm not going to say you don't take a part-time job to keep it going. Don't fan it in different ways. Don't do what you have to do. But that is a lot harder to give up. Yeah. That's a lot harder.
And you're killing me over here because I'm thinking about some of that now, and I'm like, am I investing my time in the right areas where I can't, and keeping that mindset, no matter what happens, I'm going to figure this out. I feel
listen to here. Yeah. Listen to here. I mean, you don't check this out, right?
Yeah.
You guys still got to be responsible, man. I got to pay rent. I got to make, I'm a big grown up in the real world. I got to make it work, right? Yeah. But how do you know you're in love, right? How do you know? Because, when she walks in the room, man, I feel unbelievable. I can't think of anybody I'd rather spend time with. I live to give her joy. I mean, that's how you know, right? I'm in the place I need to be. And when I'm not, then I got to think about why. And what am I missing? Am I off target? How do I need to realign? Because it's not like you get it and you're locked in and it's perfect, but it's sure a lot better working around the edges with it than it is to be in a totally wrong state.
Yeah. Because it's, right? That's the whole thing is even the show that we're doing right now. I think that's one of the first things for me where, even when I started, I think my first few interviews were really bad. Nobody should ever listen to those. There's probably some smart things my guest said, but I have to listen to my stuff. It's almost like a quarterback watching game tape. You have to go back and check yourself.
Of course.
And I still remember when I started, even when I released the first few, it was terrifying, but I enjoyed it so much. I just felt like it was, I was I don't care what has to happen or what I have to do to go from the first few episodes, which were a little rough, to I just want it to, I don't care about ranking first on iTunes or on the podcast, but I just want it to be so helpful and so good that people, that the people who do listen to it, they're going to do something that they've wanted to do, or do something that challenges them, or do something there's two people I know of now that I'm I don't know any other stories other than these two for people that have listened. I'm sure Anna's probably tired of me bringing her up on the podcast, but she left her job and is traveling the world right now. And she said it was because she listened to a travel episode I did with Peter Atwood. And another guy, I didn't even know he listened to the show. And I haven't seen him for years. And he posted a picture on Instagram and he was jacked, right? And he's like, thanks Trevor Carlson and the formula for the inspiration for me to get started working out. And he's lost 60 pounds.
A thought when you talk about the podcast, the notion is that, like I said, you've got to think through how does this become a sustainable business model. I mean, that all goes with it, right? And I hate to say it, that's kind of part of living in the real world and figuring things out. But at the same time, if your focus is on how do I create something so meaningful, I get to this place where people who listen, their lives are affected, their lives are changed, they're moved. My belief is that when you activate others like that, when you make that difference, and there's got to be a way that can sustain itself.
Right.
Not saying you're going to be rich, right? But that's kind of the way it works. And that gets back to the whole thing we were talking about with the happiness, where if I stop at the place where I'm in my element, where I'm in the check sent me high flow, where I'm doing something I love, and let's even say I'm remarkable at it, but I have not thought or figured out how to plug it into the world, into something larger than myself, then what you've got is a hobby.
Yeah.
Maybe a very talented hobby, maybe someone you're very good at, but not one that is impacting the lives of others.
Yeah.
When you've figured out that last piece to it, how to activate it, how to make it something larger than yourself, how to have it make a difference on the lives of others, well now, like I said, now that will find a place and a way to sustain you.
Yeah, I hope so. And my biggest hope, Andre, you'll have to thank Andre Perry for this. He's like, why do you do the podcast? And I gave him some like BS answer where I was like, oh, I just want to go meet cool people and talk to them. And then he just sat there very quietly and didn't say a word. And I was like, you want the real answer? And so I just kind of told him, I told you my backstory a bit earlier. And really the whole reason was like, I've made a lot of mistakes. I didn't really know anybody that had done what I wanted to do. And I feel like I made a lot of mistakes because of that. And I feel like if I can give people access to people who have accomplished this stuff before, and those people can tell them, like I asked you before, how do you get started? What do you do if you're in this spot? What are the steps? If they can hear that, and then they can take that template and apply it to their own life, and they can avoid some of those mistakes and that heartache and that pain of some of the things, the potholes that they might hit along the way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big win for this whole show. Even if it's just Henry and I'm like, I think that's important.
Well, and we really didn't know each other till
a couple
hours ago. And the reason I'm here is because I sensed your genuineness. And to me, somebody who truly cares and truly is working towards that's an easy guy to root for. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So that really wraps up like the first part of our show. I have a couple regular canned questions I ask every guest. The first one, is there anything that you do, David, on a daily basis that you feel like either gives you a leg up on the day or makes your day a win?
There's a couple things. I'm a real believer in journaling. When you're able to actually write your ideas and thoughts down, you take the time to articulate it, pen to paper, it forces you to clarify it and articulate in a way that sometimes is mumbling around in your head. So it's often I discover really what I am thinking by actually forcing myself to write it. And I have been for about a decade now. I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm at the gym by 5. And there's something about taking care of the vehicle you're driving to help you along the way. And so and then I collect inspiring, wonderful people. One of the reasons you mentioned some of the people that I've interviewed along my career, and the truth be told, I pick people that are interesting to me, and I hope if I can figure out, I can go into it inspired, then I can also figure out how to then utilize that, package it, and share it with my students and or to others. And so, you talked about over dinner about the influence of people around you. You mentioned Andy Stoll a couple of times. Andy's big line is you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So who can help you see differently, help to guide you, help to inspire you. And I want to collect those people. I want them to help me get where I want to go.
Yeah. We were talking about books a little bit earlier, and so my next question is, what I'm going to phrase this a little differently than I typically do. So if you had to gift one book to someone, and it was the only book you could gift, which book would that be?
We've mentioned it. Probably, I've read a lot of books. But probably the book that was the most impactful to me would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, that book changed my perception on a lot of stuff. Because just for the people who haven't read it, it's just like when you think about the psychology of all of it, and even when they were rescued at the camp, and some of them were advocating for some of the guards because some of the guards were nicer than the other ones. It's just like, I don't know, the whole thing was just...
Yeah, and I'm real careful. I have some friends that are so sensitive that a book like that, the tragedy, the story of that would be something that would keep them up at night in not a positive way, right? I'm able to kind of go through that, and I want to know that, and I want to learn from it because I don't ever want to see us repeat it. And I want to see how those lessons, I figure if I can learn through the experiences of others and not have to travel that path on my own, I'll take that anytime, right? And so, but I'm also very sensitive. I've got friends that book would be difficult for, but that would be the book for me that has made the biggest impact.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any message that you'd like to leave our audience with today? I know we talked about a lot, but...
Well, I'm grateful to be here. The same advice that I give my students is one I struggle with and work on my own, right? I continue to ask those questions. I continue to think about who I want to be when I grow up. I continue to think about how I can live the most meaningful life I can. And at the moment, the place that the world's kind of landed me has been in a college town with young people, and there's a real opportunity there. If it was senior citizens, if it was kindergartners, I could probably make a similar argument. But it's been wonderful, and what I love about it is that not too soon after they leave, my eyes. They're off to do wonderful things that I can see how this immediately, started to put them in a good spot. So, I don't have to wait till they get through elementary school and high school and college to start seeing where their lives are really going to start taking root. So, I think I have had, as you mentioned, you have too, I've had people in my life, and I think that's just the nature of going through it. There's people that you have that you love and care about that are taken from you way too early. And, we all in the moment have a wake-up call, right? Just like you get in a fender bender and all of a sudden, for a little while, you're driving much safer. But I try to hold those people close to me and really, to your question, think about what kind of life I want to live and how none of us know how long we've got, and so let's use the time today. What I do as a practice, and I'll end with this, sometimes looking at our lives, I mentioned that big novel, that's a lot. For me, 4 years when I was 18 years old was a lot to look at, right? But I got the idea one day of what if we looked at it as each day as a short story? Yeah. So in other words, I'm going to wake up today and I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to try and wrap my head around this gigantic novel. That's too much. I can lose my way in it as I'm trying to write 300 or 400 pages. Yeah. But if all I got to do is focus on waking up this morning, and then when I put my head on the pillow, man, and what does that story look like day after day? Well, then, man, you start to get some beautiful things happening. And what it does is I can keep my focus for 24 hours, right? And then what it does is it forces me to do things because, hey, man, this is a short story, and I only got this amount of time to write it, so I'm going to do things that otherwise I might put off. I'm going to go spend time with my folks. I'm going to ask them things that I really want to hear from them about. I'm going to take my wife and do something very special. I'm going to show the people I love how I love them, right? And I don't need to, I could do that tomorrow. the short story's getting written right now, and the magic starts to happen when you do that.
Well, and I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time with all your projects and everything going on to sit down and talk about life design in general. I feel like that this wasn't like a typical interview because a lot of the stuff that you were saying was resonating with me personally. So I'm kind of like processing as you're saying it. But thanks again, David. And,
It's my honor. Thank you for asking me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for this show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson, and I appreciate you taking the time to stop by, and whether it's viewing our episodes or listening to our podcasts or reading our blog posts, all of you guys really help keep this show going. So I much appreciate your time and attention, and hopefully we provided a little bit of value for you. Now, if you're interested and you think you might enjoy getting some blog posts, emails, other podcasts, guides, any of that sort of thing sent to your inbox every week, go ahead and head over to theformulapodcast.com and sign up for our email list today. That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks again, everyone, for stopping by, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.